coming back. If there's any thunder or flashes of light, it's just a massive thunderstorm that's going on outside at the moment, which I'm quite pleased about because I'm hoping that it's going to reduce the temperature. It's been a bit hot and muggy, and quite honestly the last few nights have been rather too hot for me and haven't slept that well, and I'm more sweaty, and anyway, never mind, you don't really want to know that, I'm sure. Feels like I've been doing quite a lot in the last week. I've got some undead stuff on the go, I've got some wood elves on the go. I made a decision about what I'm doing with the bases of my Hero Quest minis, and I've started chopping those up. Yeah, I feel like quite a lot's happening. I'm doing finalising some stuff on the Dreamstone, so that's hopefully coming up on Kickstarter first week in July, fingers crossed. My little Spriggan sculpts are done, so hopefully they will also hit that, and that gives me a bit of a quandary, because do I do those on Kickstarter and then do another Kickstarter? I don't think Kickstarter lets you run two simultaneously. I don't like doing a Kickstarter while I've got one unfulfilled. I'll have to have to think about that one. But anyway, that's coming along quite nicely. But I thought while we're rolling, I'd carry on and do another in the Woods series and look at another warband. And the warband that I want to look at this week is the Myeri. Now they were the kind of flagship range for Oakbound. Oakbound exists primarily because I wanted to do some sculpts of them, and other people wanted to buy them. So if you remember that far back, that was like 5-6 years ago, possibly longer than that, 6 or 7 years ago. Thank you for encouraging me. It's taken wings, it's flown, and it's now, yeah, this. So the first book, let me get out my bookcase. There you go. In the first book, the Myeri were fairly prominent, as befits the fact that basically all I had available miniatures-wise were the Myeri, with a handful of other bits and pieces. But this one, with this edition, I really wanted to dial them back a little bit, make them a bit less prominent, explore some of the other bits. So they are now just a few pages in the rulebook. But my love of the Myeri has, I think, been reflected a little bit in the status of the warbands. They are possibly a little bit overpowered. I'm not saying that they're a game breaker. They're not a game breaker. I'm not particularly bothered about balance in games in any case. This is a sort of asymmetric game. You're picking an objective for a warband. So if things aren't entirely matched, it doesn't matter. I'm very much all about the kind of the flavour of it. But we tried to balance these a little bit to make sure that all the warbands had a chance against each other. If you're used to the warbands in the first edition, you'll see that the warband in the second edition very much strips it down to a Losbast warband. That's a warrior warband. The Oibreth, the workers, they feature in the roleplay. You can play them as roleplay characters, but they're not really a feature in the warbands, because they probably wouldn't send their workers into that kind of situation. Of course, you can buy just a standard profile Myeri, and that will give you an Oibreth profile at the top, but all of the warband options are Losbast based. The real flexibility from a Myeri warband comes through the leader, through what you choose. So in the first edition, you had the choice of a Tiana, a chieftain who had come up from Losbast stock and was a fighter, or from Oibreth stock and was a thinker, politician, diplomat. The Tiana is not the leader of a warband in the second edition. There, because each clan only has one, they're assumed to be much higher ranking than the leader of a warband that are patrolling Myeri territory. So the leader of a tower in second edition is the mage, and the background of the mage is that they are they're picked from the Losbast as a kind of warden to patrol the borders of the Myeri territory, and are also sent out on missions to achieve things on behalf of the clan. So they're your leader, and they're really upgradable. I mean, if you contrast with what it costs to upgrade the Spriggan's profile in the previous video, you can up pretty much everything except agility by 1 point for just 3 points of upgrade. And you've got 2 steps. Oh no, sorry, you can upgrade agility. It's hiding in the second column. There you go. You can upgrade everything at 3 points per upgrade. But you've also got the option to do a double upgrade on wisdom, courage, and strength at just 5 points. So that means that you can have a wisdom of 4, or you can have a courage at 4, or you can have a strength of 4, which is pretty powerful in a leader character. You've also got the ability to add a skill for 3 points, herb items for 1 point, and Myeri items for 3 points. Now you get a Hurrow or a Snaghorn as standard. That's there partly because you might want to give them a Hackscar, just because that looks really cool to be running around with a massive greatsword. But the other thing that you might want to give them is a Pukaruru totem. So in the first edition that was standard for a mage. In this edition it's an optional upgrade. What that does is essentially give your leader an aura of fear. So that's pretty helpful in keeping people away from him, or so that he can chase people across the battlefield. And if he's going to go into combat with people, then using that aura of fear to use up stamina, pushing your opponents back as you go, is quite a helpful technique. So really consider how you want to play your warband when you're picking your leader, because that's basically where your options lie. Once you go beyond that, you've got troop types to pick are Drowie, Scarlight, World Louse, and Losbast. You're going to want to take a Drow Mystic, because why would you not take a Drow Mystic? Their ability to Fate Weave with a wisdom of 4 is pretty incredible. So you're definitely going to want to take one of those. No, I say definitely. You might not want to. You might want to play it completely differently. But I would definitely take a Drow. And I would definitely take their familiar as well, the Raven, because so many of the Fate Weaving abilities are based on what your Geomancer or your Augur can perceive. And with a Drow, you're going to want to keep them well out of harm's way, hide them away somewhere, especially for Geomancers, because they're going to need to concentrate and focus and build up their Fate Weaving abilities. And if they get distracted or attacked by anything during that period, then they've lost all of their benefits. So you definitely want to keep them protected and hidden. And you're not going to have enough troops to do that in your warband, so you need to be keeping them well out of the way. But you can send a Raven flying around the battlefield and using that, the Raven familiar, as your spotter. So it massively increases the perception that a Drow has. Of course, they're vulnerable to missile fire. Of course, they're going to get picked off pretty quickly. But they're a small flying target, so they shouldn't be too easily taken down. Losbast are then going to make up the remainder of your warband. I would suggest 5 Losbast, which is the maximum you can take with the points allowance. Their perception is not so great. They've only got 1 eye after all, but their agility of 3 more than makes up for it. So they're on balance the same as a Tuatha, but that ability to move faster is really helpful, not just for moving, but also for fighting. And all of your Myeri characters have an endurance of 7, so they're all that bit tougher to hit in combat. They're really a fighty warband. If you're up for getting into straight up fights, this is the warband to pick, because they're fast and hard hitting. And that endurance of 7 just means that if you're taking stuff that's or facing stuff that's got an impact of 3, which is fairly standard, you're going to get into the 3rd round of combat before you're in any immediate danger. If you're hitting stuff that's got an impact of 2, you're going to get into 4 rounds of combat, and it'll be well over by then if you're playing your troops right. So that gives you that extra round in combat there. Skurli are interesting. They've got an extra point of perception, but really what the combo for the Skurli is the Wheelian pipes. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it, by the way. If anyone knows better, the Irish pipes that are bellows powered rather than blown. Wheelian pipes? I don't know. Someone correct my pronunciation on that. But that, coupled with their bard ability, means that they can play the pipes to raise or lower any one stat for all characters across the battlefield. And if you can plug that in at the right time during the battle, then that's going to be of great advantage to you. Unfortunately, that does mean that you have to get your timing right. Now, a Skurli only has a decisiveness of 6, so that's decidedly average. If you're playing your Merge as written, because they start off with a Losbars profile, they've got a decisiveness of 5, so they're well below average. So in order to get that Skurli to come in when it needs to come in during the battle, you're really going to want to boost your wisdom or your courage on your leader to make sure that they've got that ability to order the piper to play when they need to play. So it is putting a lot of eggs in one basket if you're going to play that trick, but it can come off if you play it well. The other option that they've got is the Waldlaus. Now, Waldlaus are 10 points, and for that 10 points you get 5 points of strength and 8 points of endurance. So they're pretty beefy. You're not going to find anything that's as strong and hard-hitting and affordable as that anywhere else in the book. The real downside to them is that they only have an agility of 1, and being animals, they need to be controlled. So they can be controlled by either the Merge or a Drow attached to the Warband. But if you don't have a Drow and your Merge is taken out, you lose control of the Waldlice. They just curl up into a ball, and then you can't field them anymore. So they're okay if you want a slightly cheaper thing to stand on a spot and deny your opponents that spot. But they're certainly not going to be running around the battlefield after things. So they're very much a defensive thing. The quite cool thing that Myeri can do is they can dance the Peru Peru. Now the Peru Peru dance is basically the haka. So if you imagine all of your warband getting together, they have to be within 2 inches of each other in order to do this. But once per game, if your warband are all within 2 inches of each other, they can dance the Peru Peru and intimidate their opponents with this haka dance, this ferocious haka dance. And if they successfully intimidate their enemies, then their enemies have to flee as if from a grapple. So that is potentially useful because it will put their enemies on a back foot. It'll deplete all of their stamina. So if you can time that at a point where perhaps they're near an objective but not quite there, and you're forcing them back a bit, and then you can overwhelm them at the next activation with the surge of your troops, then that's well worth doing. You probably only sometimes want to plan your strategy around doing the Peru Peru dance, because once your opponents have sussed that you can do this, they will be doing everything they can to prevent you from getting 2 inches apart in a line. They'll be breaking up your line, they'll be taking people out, they'll be minimising the number of their troops that can get hit by it. So it has limited appeal, but the first couple of times you do it is probably to quite good effect. some universal good points that I haven't yet picked up, the lashing tails on the Lozbust. So that gives them essentially a line of engagement to the rear of their base as well, so they can be engaged front and back without penalty. And if they're engaged at the rear, where you couldn't normally hit with a weapon, you can hit with a tail, with a lashing tail weapon. It's an impact of 3, so it's pretty hefty. And if you're not engaged at the rear, it counts as being armed with an extra weapon, so you can do the double strike thing. So it is good and pretty effective. You've got dual weapon options when you pick your warband. Most of the Lozbust, you can pick either a Haroa, which gives you an optional reach. You don't have to use it, because remember, they don't have the particular skills off the shelf to not be off balance if they're using a reach weapon. So that is something to take into consideration. Perhaps when you're advancing your warband, you want to make sure that you give at least a few of them skills that let them ignore off balance controls with pole arms. But it's helpful to have that optional reach if your enemy are just staying a bit too far away for you to get to them. The other option is that you can take a snaghorn, and they're basically an axe, but they have this ability that if you upgrade to give them the snag skill, then you can hook your opponents, either to trap them in combat until you get your other warriors in, or you can unhorse them, or you can stop them from running off and achieving objectives. So that's a handy option to have. But again, it depends on whether you can either give them the skill or wait until a bit later on and buy them skill. Good objectives to do with Myeri warbands are anything that requires speed and combat ability. So Revenge is a good one, Defile is a good one, Escape is a good one, Counting Coup is a good one, because of course you don't have to inflict damage when you hit. You can choose to do something that just gives you extra points next turn. So if you win a combat, you don't have to deal damage. The good thing for the Myeri with their extra points of agility is that they can generally break off from enemies and make a clean getaway. So you can initiate a grapple, win the grapple, deal no damage, and then withdraw largely without penalty, whereas slower troops would not be able to do that quite as effectively. So they're good for that. And toteming, which is appropriate for Merge's warband, going around putting up little Pukaruru totems around the board. Their major drawback is not having any missile capability. It's not a huge drawback, but it does mean that you will have to make use of their extra agility to dive them from cover to cover to avoid having their stamina getting dropped down significantly. They're not a big warband. They're not the smallest. There's certainly getting more models than you are in a Spriggan warband. But small to medium, you're looking at about 7 models. So you're not going to be able to do area control particularly well if you're running after objectives. So things like Guardians, Horde, and Defile are going to be objectives that Myeri warbands struggle to defend against. And if you have Rescue picked against you, and you have to give up one of your models, that can be a handicap, because in a Myeri warband, you're going to need all of the Lozbust that you can get to be able to sort of gang up on other models and gang up on objectives. And every one that you lose, which you potentially do from a rescue, because your opponent could cut them loose at any point and then turn on them, and that would be an expensive thing for you to lose. You haven't really got any cheap troops that you can throw away in a rescue situation, so that's a threat. One of the advantages, though, is that the Lozbust are not easy things to take down in a fight. It would take probably 3 or 4 Tuatha or similar models to bring down a Lozbust in a single round. So yeah, they're not that vulnerable, but if you do lose one, it's a major blow. So I hope that's helpful if you're planning a Myeri warband. Let me know how to pronounce that thing about Irish pipes if you know anything about Irish pipes. And yeah, if you've got any ideas about what I should do with my Kickstarter timings, let me know. I'm probably looking at Dreamstone Kickstarter going live on the first week in July, because hopefully people will have been paid by then. And also I should have had the castings by then and painted up and be ready to go. So yeah, how I fit the Spriggans around that is an interesting one. But yeah, let me know what you think. Have a nice week, and I will see you next week.